And let's get started. Fire, Ice, Floods, and Storms. It's a dramatic title, and there's a reason for that. It's because this is a subject matter that really and truly touches every living being on this planet. You cannot get along without trees, and in today's modern society, you cannot get along without electricity. And this is where the two interact. This is where our already renowned Center for Environmental Law meets with our already renowned Center for Energy Law. It's where the two come together, and it's an important discipline of its own. And it's important not just for the law school, but I would say for all of you as well. So you already know who we are. Let's get started. So our changing climate. The Earth's changing climate has resulted in a dramatic increase in both the number and severity of significant weather events across the globe. We all have just experienced one here in the shape of Hurricane Ida, which wasn't just here in New Orleans, but it wreaked havoc everywhere it went. And that is true of generally every hurricane, but that was a very, very acute and recent example. In the United States, we now average 16.2 weather events that exceed damages of $1 billion every year, and that's over the last 10 years. In 2020, last year, the US incurred over $270 billion in natural disaster damage, equating to just under $1,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country. Now, when you take the average of 16.2, that's $16.2 billion, it's a long way before you hit that 270, which is meaningful, right? Because what that says is that there are a lot of $100 million or multi-million dollar damage events that occur every year, including last year. If we want to look at this year, that's what we've got, right? It's pretty ugly, and this year isn't even done. We've already got 18 separate billion-dollar events this year alone, and we've got basically a month and a half to go with winter storms coming. Not your style, hopefully. All right, so our best defense is, oh, come on, really? A strong offense, right? Come on. The UN, what does the UN tell us? Well, that there's a global focus on the importance of trees to stabilize our warming planet. It's never been more apparent. You look anywhere in the news and you see tree planting initiatives everywhere you look, right? And there's a reason for that. Public, political, and scientific consensus agrees that the increased planting of trees will help stem the warming of our planet. Just last week, right? The meeting in Glasgow at the COP26 conference, it is still continuing as we speak, but one of the very first things they did was to pass this declaration on forests and land use. And what you can see is that the countries involved, all the member parties are agreeing that it is important to manage and restore our forests. That is a major focus. And in fact, if you were to look at the president's new infrastructure bill, and regardless of which side you're on, it's been passed. So that $1 trillion package, $65 billion has been allocated to improving the electric grid, and you can't do that without impacting the trees along the way. And that's where we come in. Because there's a huge demand for electric power. That demand is at an all-time high, and we are getting up to the point where the grid cannot handle the increased demand that's predicted as more and more people move from gasoline-powered cars to electric-powered cars. There's a goal to make it so that there will be an all-electric fleet out there in the very foreseeable future. And the existing grid cannot support that. It can't be done. There needs to be additional infrastructure development. And again, the only way to do that is for the government to provide the funding to the utility companies so that this can be built. And again, you can't do that without spending a very substantial proportion of that $65 billion on the trees that are in those pathways. But leads to conflict, right? trees are the problem and they're also the solution. So how do you deal with this, right? Without causing billions of dollars of property damage, death, and destruction along the way. And there is a way, and it requires good, solid thinking, the kind that we've been doing here over the last year. Jeopardy question. Anyone play Jeopardy? Watch it? Yes? It's playing. Well, that would have been the Jeopardy music. Unfortunately, it doesn't. The audio seems to be off. It may be a function of the Zoom. Anyway, final Jeopardy question. This is a real final Jeopardy question. I'm not making this up. November 2003 report said that better tree trimming may have prevented this event that affected 50 million people in August of that year. Any guesses? Anyone know? Blackout. That's right, the blackout. Right? What was the 2003 Northeast Power blackout? You have to give it in the form of a question. So only one of the contestants actually got it in, actually got that right. The other two, and by the way, look at the black area on that map. You know what it's supposed to look like, right? And what's in the middle of that? New York City and Quebec and, right? I mean, and Montreal. I mean, this is going all the way out to Chicago, down to DC. I mean, that is huge. The economic impact of that blackout was in the hundreds of billions of dollars from that power being turned off. And the reason for that was trees on power lines. And what did the federal government do? The federal government stepped in and said, we can't have this ever again. And so they passed rulemaking then that developed a new way to handle transmission lines, which are the high power transmission of electricity. And by doing that, and by abiding by those standards, and by imposing very, very heavy fines to utility companies that didn't get in line, we haven't had a major blackout like that since 2003. There are solutions, and they do work, and it doesn't necessarily require wholesale destruction of the environment. It doesn't. What happened was, in addition to removing trees that could fall on the power lines, they required the planting of vegetation that would be friendly to pollinators. And as a result, the bee populations along all those major transmission highways have strengthened and grown. So in an environment generally where bee populations are in decline, along the transmission lines, they're growing and strengthening. And that's a really good result for everybody. So the other two contestants got the question wrong, but they answered the same. Anyone know what that was? What did they think better tree trimming would have avoided?
Falling. Accidents?
No. Wildfires. And just in case you're curious as to how long it takes for a wildfire to develop. Now there would be sound, but again, but for the Zoom call. Doesn't take long. This is not a tree that fell. This is a tree that's being blown into a power line. And as it hits, it's arcing. And that electric arc is lighting that tree on fire. Really, it doesn't take much. And if there was more fuel on the ground, this would have been a wildfire that would have spread through that neighborhood. And that's the importance of having vegetation management done in a timely and appropriate manner so you can avoid that. This is just a problem out in California, right? No, actually it's not. This is a problem that's nationwide. Yeah, that's the explosion. All right. So before it jumps into the next, let's see, we have to escape.
The explosion, the transformer going on?
No, that was the tree exploding.
The tree itself?
That was the tree itself exploding because you have a lot of, as the water inside the tree heats up, the steam has to release somewhere, and so it explodes. And yeah, and if you're nearby, you're getting hit by shrapnel, wood shrapnel, and people have gotten injured from that, taking videos a little too close. So it doesn't take much for a UVM fire to start. Take a look at that top picture. This isn't a tree that fell on the power line. It's a branch no thicker than my pinky, right? And you can see the arc, right? But down power lines, landing in dry vegetation will start a fire. And And power lines, they fall. I mean, over time, they get worn out. Things happen, wind events, squirrels running across the line and, and suddenly grounding, and then you can have all kinds of events. This isn't necessarily a cause related to the any kind of bad maintenance by a utility company. This can be done with responsible maintenance by utility companies, just a branch falling in the wrong spot at the wrong time.
Sorry, what is UVM?
Oh, sorry, utility vegetation management. So tree and power line conflicts are a principal cause of devastating wildfires everywhere. In fact, in California, the wildfire season has ended because of much, much needed rain, which has been falling pretty much nonstop since the beginning of this month. But wildfire season is now starting in places like West Virginia, and we're seeing massive wildfires in West Virginia now. And it's because of dry conditions and high wind. Of the 20 worst wildfires in California, nearly all were caused by tree and power line conflicts. The 5 most destructive fires in the United States were all caused in this manner. And the most destructive fires in the following states have all been caused by conflicts between trees and power lines. And that may not be all of them. There may be more that can also say the same thing. And in these foreign countries, right? This is a serious problem that's global, not just a California issue. So UVM outages occur from the same mechanics. When the tree falls and it's wet, you're not going to get a fire because it's too wet, but you'll have outages. So you see in the bottom right again that image of the Northeast power blackout. But what are you looking here? Same year in Europe, they had the great European blackout of 2003. And that, you can see, took out power for all of Italy, Slovenia, Austria, parts of southern France, right? All without power. Again, well, this would be a €100 billion event. And our own Kim Tallis was actually one of the people who reported on the failures here. And once again, trees on power lines and heavy wind. Lower left, what you're looking at is just this past summer in Detroit. 1.5 million people without power, not just the city of Detroit, but basically all of Michigan, all of Indiana, all of Illinois, without power for a period of almost a week. It started coming back in bits. So some people were fortunate to only have lost their power for a few days. But I'll bet you there's not a person in this room who hasn't experienced a power outage due to a storm. None of those storms, more likely than not, were the actual cause of the power outage. Instead, this was the result of a storm impacting a tree, which in turn impacted a power line. And in the upper right, of course, you're seeing the damage from Hurricane Ida and the power outages here, which lasted at least a week in some areas longer, some areas shorter, but that's the extent of the power outage problem. And in fact, the number of outages per year over the last 5 years has doubled over the prior 5 years. This is a growing problem. This is not something that's every year you have a little of this. It's getting worse. And you don't get out of it without ice, simply because you've got ice and cold conditions. And here's your proof. Snow on the ground, arcing, flames, fire, right? Just because it's cold, just because there's ice, just because ice is wet, doesn't mean you're not getting a fire. This was West Virginia last winter. Flooding, we saw that as well here with Ida, and not just here in Louisiana, all the way up the coast, right? Trees came down, landed on power lines, cut out power, resulting in no reliability in terms of service, but also massive problems for everyone involved. It's not just the flooding now. Now you've got down power lines, and anyone who's ever heard anything about electricity knows water and power lines and people in that water with the power lines, that's a bad, bad mixture. People die. Speak about other major problems. This boy was climbing a tree. He's 8 years old. That's what 8-year-old boys do. And he was climbing a tree in Maine, didn't realize there was a power line going through the tree. He may not have even appreciated the danger even if he knew it was there. He reached up and touched it. He lost his left hand. His right hand is about half gone. He's lost most of his toes because the electricity arced from point of contact out to the ground. He has 3rd-degree burns over most of his body. That's permanent. He's still in the hospital as far as I know. He's getting fitted for prosthetics. This is a danger too. In fact, in the state of Oregon, they had so many child deaths due to electrocution from power lines running through trees that they changed their laws regarding utility vegetation management, UVM, so as to address that problem. You wouldn't want it to be your children, of course. Here's another little boy playing in Puerto Rico. And he and his friends were hot and saw some mangoes on a nearby tree, grabbed one, ate it, it's good, went for the next one, and bang. Got hit by the power line that was running through the tree, dead on the spot. It's not just little boys playing in trees, it's professionals too. This bucket truck was operating in Pennsylvania, directly across from an elementary school, and the bucket truck operator backed into a power line and was burned alive inside the bucket. Regrettably, due to less than stellar safety practices in this case, there was no one there who was able to rescue him, even though in many other places that is the requirement. You have to have somebody who can go and rescue you. However, he was up against the power line itself and it was grounding through him. There may not have been anything that the rescue person could have done anyway, but this is the level of danger. So as it results in, well, legislators coming in and making new rules, making new laws, and unfortunately, a lot of them are reactionary, not well thought out. You wind up with confusion. All right, this isn't a UVM related sign, but you get the picture, right? Regulations need to be well thought out. You can't just react and do something just for the sake of doing something that impacts an industry that is this huge. You just can't. What happens as a result of that is more death and more property destruction. And that should be unacceptable to all of us, right? Why is this important? Well, laws and UVM-related laws and regulations drive the work that utilities perform. They're not going to do it unless the law requires them to do it, by and large. UVM laws and regulations might be different in different jurisdictions. And if you're a utility and you provide service to more than one jurisdiction, you might actually have different laws that apply to you based on which side of a line you happen to be on. Similarly, if you're providing services to a utility company, well, you need to know what laws apply to you depending on which jurisdiction you're in. And similarly, again, if you're a worker, you need to know what you're doing, because if you're working for that company and you're over here, well, the rule may be this, but if you're over there, the rule may be something else. So let's take a look at some regulation. Who writes this stuff? Really? Okay, yeah, it's us. I don't know if anyone here is from California. Well, I know Stevie is, but he's not responsible for this. But this is a hot button issue in California. This is California Public Resource Code section 4428. And here's what it provides, and this is why it's important. It provides that no person, you can't see it because of the sign here, but no person shall use or operate any vehicle powered by an internal combustion engine, right? Trucks, bucket trucks, cars, without providing and maintaining for firefighting purposes only suitable and serviceable tools in the amounts, manner, and location prescribed in this section. And those are a sealed box of tools, not a bag, a box. And, all right, one backpack pump type fire extinguisher filled with water, one of those, filled with water inside the locked box. Okay. 2 axes, 2 McLeod fire tools, and a sufficient number of shovels so that each employee typically have a 3-man crew. at the operation can be equipped to fight the fire. Well, crap, that's a lot of stuff. And that filled water backpack, pretty damn heavy. Yeah, you have a 3-man crew and a 2-person lift, right? NIOSH sets a limit at 50 pounds for 1 person. So that box with all that stuff in it is well over that 50-pound limit. So wait a minute, hold on a second. Don't we already have fire setups for the crews that they use? Yeah, we do. That is the typical fire setup. And notice what you've got. You've got the kinds of tools that you would expect to have. There's your McLeods, there's your shovels, you've got a fire extinguisher, which is going to be a lot more useful. And that silver box there, that is actually a hand-carried water pump. You can have that or the backpack style. It's choice. But this is your typical setup. When you think about it, you've got 3 people out there, and with that lockbox of tools, you've got, I don't know, more tools than any one person can actually use simultaneously. It's not like your shovel's going to go like out of order. You don't have to wait for the battery to refresh. It's almost silly. You're duplicating the fire suppression work. So what's all this for? Well, it turns out that what this regulation actually provides is that it's not applicable to anyone doing emergency operations, and it only applies for industrial operations. So my argument is this law is not meant to apply to tree crews that are doing either routine maintenance, because that's not an industrial operation, or those that are involved in doing an emergency tree removal. For example, the tree is about to burn or is already burning. And so this law that requires that lockbox of tools shouldn't apply to you. Say, well, okay, great, then what's the problem? Well, the problem is that CAL FIRE, which is charged with enforcing this, has been going around to tree crews all throughout California and saying, hey, where's your lockbox of tools? Don't have one? Here's a penalty, here's a fine, pay that. And it's not just the payment of the fine, because you can tolerate that as a cost of doing business, but it gets reported to the utility you work for. And when that happens, you get your name on a list of companies that just engaged in some sort of life threat safety violation. And you rack up enough of those, you get kicked off the property. And in an environment where there are already not enough tree workers to do the work that's needed, to lose a good company that is actually complying with the law that applies to them, to lose them and their services endangers the public. Now, that's not really CAL FIRE's purpose, but they don't know any better, and they need this instruction. They need to know that they shouldn't be tagging these tree companies with these fines and penalties. So, our environmental crisis is being compounded by an energy crisis. There's an immediate need for clear, strong, well-reasoned, and independent leadership in an industry that has been crying out for this kind of help for decades. And in case you're curious, this is a $64 billion a year industry in the United States alone. And yet, no law firm specializes in the practice. A mere handful of lawyers have any experience at all with UVM. No law school anywhere on the planet teaches so much as one course on the subject. Does this make sense? Well, no. So Tulane Law School has stepped into the breach. And our internationally recognized programs in energy law have combined with our internationally recognized program in environmental law, and together formed the Utility Vegetation Management Initiative. Last year, November 2020, we commenced the organization of this initiative, naming me as the director of that initiative and appointing me as a visiting research fellow. And thank you, Dean. And this is where Cheri comes in. A select group of extraordinary students was then engaged to develop an understanding of UVM as an independent and distinct discipline. So we adopted a 3-phase approach.
I get it, it's a joke, a 3-phase.
Thank you. Oh, hey, awesome.
You got one.
I got one. You got it. All right, there's
Okay,
2. Okay, all right. This is a power pole and the electric lines running across it are phases, so 3 phases.
If you have to explain it, it's not a joke.
So there are 3 phases. Phase 1, teach the students UVM from the best minds in the industry. Phase 2, have the students research and compile all of the UVM laws, regulations, ordinances, and rules across all of North America and present their findings at international conferences. And phase 3, engage the students in co-authoring with me law review style papers on important issues in UVM. And here's the educational program that we provided them. You add that up, it's somewhere around 15 hours of work. They didn't get academic credit for it because they were being paid. That might be something that we can work on in the future, but for right now, that's how that worked. And you can see from this list all kinds of really great, notable people who instructed our students here. Cheri, I know that one of the people who was influential for you was Dan Altman, who's senior counsel at Encore, which is one of the major utility companies in Texas. And I know that even after the conversation, you continued that. Can you tell everybody a little about that?
So Dan Altman introduced me to the general counsel for Encore, and I was able to contact him on a Friday. And this was after the winter storm in Texas. So you can imagine everything he had on his plate. And he still took time out, about an hour and a half to 2 hours, to talk with me initially about the paper I was writing for the project, but also it was extremely enlightening to get a real world view of what these regulations mean to a general counsel. I mean, he's a lawyer, he's a general counsel, but he's also having to think about the business side. And so getting his viewpoint on how the regulations affect him and his advice to Encore was extremely important, and it helped me in developing my paper. But furthermore, I think especially important as a student, it helped me in developing a professional network. That's an opportunity that you get here and there, but having personal time in the aftermath of winter storm was an honor.
And what's really good about this program is now all the students who went through this program have all these people's direct contact information. They can reach out and pick up the phone and call these people, and these people will pick up the phone and answer and speak to our students because they know who they are, right? And this was, I can't really say it was one-on-one, but for students and somebody like the president of Arbor Day Foundation, that's as small class setting as you can really hope for. So Cheri, pick somebody else who might have been like influential on you from this list. And my ego is not so sensitive that you have to pick me or Steve. Who else? Tell everybody about what you thought.
So personally, I would say it's actually a tie between Honorable Commissioner Paul Shalander and Allison Silverstein. Paul Shalander, you can see that he's the president of the Idaho Public Utility Commission and also the president of NARUC. He shined a light on what commissioners in these agencies actually do. It is a very esoteric and Byzantine environment, and just kind of understanding, okay, we've done this research, we've gone to these websites, we looked at the rules and regulations, but what do the commissioners actually do? What are their roles? What do they, on a day-to-day basis, do? And it was very informative. On the other hand, Allison Silverstein, she's an expert in her area. And it's also good to see a woman. I've seen her at the Texas PUC addressing the commission in work sessions. And you often see a woman in that position. So not just only her expertise, which is, everybody in this chart has these great fields of expertise, but seeing a woman sitting there telling the commission things that they don't know was gratifying to me as a woman, but also very, it was a role model for me. And like I said, I've seen her at the commission. I've tried not to fangirl and run up to her in the hallways. But it was just wonderful to see that, especially for me coming in as a third-year student, going into this industry, energy in general, seeing women in leadership positions is always gratifying. Right.
And we've now mentioned Cheri in connection with the Public Utility Commission of Texas a couple of times. Cheri is a policy advisor to the Public Utility Commission. She graduated in May. You want to tell everybody about maybe your interview experience at the Public Utility Commission after you graduated?
So there is an interview experience, usually about 2 hours, a couple of different attorneys that I did not have. I submitted my application. I got a phone call less than 24 hours later with the job offer. And I believe that there's a direct line between this program and seeing on my resume and that position. It was just very fortuitous. When I arrived for orientation, the 2 other attorneys who had applied and been offered a job went through that whole process. And like, how was it for you? Did you come here and say, I was told by HR that HR took my application, gave it to Commission Counsel. He looked at it and she goes, do you want me to schedule an interview? And he said, I want to hire her, which never happened in my entire life. It's taken decades to get here, but like I've told Dean Meyer, I've told Larry, I'll go down the street to Harris, and I don't gamble. I'll put money this program got me that position.
So those of you in the audience who are students, take note. We are collecting resumes. They're due today to Jane Johnson in the Environmental and Energy building in the annex. So get me your resumes, get your jobs out there, I promise you. I can't promise you that you won't even have to have an interview, but they're out there. This industry is hungry for anyone with any demonstrable knowledge in this industry to work in the law offices of the utility companies, of the public utility commissions, of major tree companies. They are all looking for attorneys who understand this area of the law. And if you go to any of the big firms that have law departments that even address this in the slightest, they don't really know what they're doing. They know this much and they practice that far so that they don't commit malpractice, but they know the limits of what they've taught themselves. For those of you who are currently practicing law, this is an area of the law that is dramatically under-lawyered. And we are here to teach you an area of the law that is needing good quality lawyers. And this is the only place where you can learn this in an organized fashion. You should think about coming back for further CLE programs, which I'm told we will be able to develop. There will be a 2-day conference coming up. You'll see more about that a little later. And we're also talking about starting a monthly lunchtime lecture series so that you can have like a 1 hour per month credit rolled in so that you too can be an expert in this area. Because right now, like I said, there's about a dozen lawyers in this country who really understand this at all. And that's not enough to handle $64 billion worth of work every year. So I want to report that we've had amazing success on our compendium so far. All the work for the research has been done and it's been compiled. And what we did was we took about 20 to 30 different data points on every jurisdiction. So we're entering all of that into a computer CRM system. So think of it as a 3D spreadsheet. So that way, what we can do is we can compare disparate pieces of regulations and laws with other things that are known about those jurisdictions. So we can try to see whether there is any causality in the way things are being approached so that we can make recommendations as to what's working and what's not working. And there's going to be a report on our preliminary findings that we'll publish by the end of the year, free of charge to anyone who wants it. I am advised that we will be adding to the law school website so that there will be a UVMI page available that you can then just link to, download the information, and it'll be yours for free. And we hope that it'll be a good, useful tool to the industry. But these are some of the preliminary findings, and I'm glad that we have 3 of our 4 students from the program here, Cheri, I see Ryan, and they worked really, really hard to develop this information. Here's something interesting about, well, public utility commissions, right? Every US jurisdiction has one, all of them have their own, and they all have basically the same mission, which is to ensure that the delivery of electricity is, among other things, the delivery of utilities is done in a safe and reliable manner at minimal cost to the ratepayers. That's their job. That's what they oversee. And that's what they hold the utility companies to. And the number of commissioners from place to place may vary, but you have really wide variation. Some places, they appoint their commissioners. The governor just appoints you, and you. You're now commissioners. Other places, they're elected. So for example, in Montana, they divide the state into 5 regions, and each region elects its own. Well, think about Montana for a second. One urban, if you want to call it that, area, and then 4 relatively rural areas. So if the urban area needs something from its utility, what are the chances that they're going to get it? If it's going to be expensive to the other 4 areas, might not happen. Might have to come out of the shareholders' pockets. That's not really good representation, even though what you have is elected commissioners. On the other hand, take a look at Utah, right? Same sort of situation, but all of the commissioners are appointed by the governor. But in that case, all of the appointed commissioners are from Salt Lake City. So if you live in one of the outer parts of the state and you need something that will cost money, you may not get it. So, you know, there are problems with both. The question is, well, how do we fix that? And you know, I'd say that's what you need an institute to study and make recommendations on. Here's some preliminary findings about NESC 218. Now this is let's call it a law for a moment, but this is the law that requires utility companies to actually do the vegetation work. And here's what it provides. Trees that may interfere with ungrounded supply conductors should be trimmed or removed. Ooh, we're all lawyers, right? May, should. Who's requiring this stuff, really? You know, if you were a junior counsel approaching the general counsel of a utility company, you could make the argument, we don't have to do this at all, right? You know, may, should, yeah, should. Well, we didn't, so what, right? That's a problem, right? And so if you're the general counsel, you say, yeah, but the thing is, if we don't do it, somebody dies, guess who gets blamed? And guess who has to pay those damages? It's gonna be us. And so we're gonna have to do it. And that's really why it's getting done. But the NESC itself is not actually legislation. NESC is the National Electric Safety Code. It's a code developed by electric safety specialists. These are not legislators, these are experts who come together and say, well, this is what ought to be done. And many states don't have any enacting legislation at all. Now, California is an exception on the one hand because what they have is much stricter than what NESC 218 requires. They have GO 95 Rule 35 instead, and that requires, you know, minimum clearance zones and all kinds of other things so that trees cannot get close enough to the lines. You know, you have other states like Oklahoma, South Dakota that do not have any incorporation of NESC 218 into their laws at all. Some states, like Wyoming and Delaware, automatically adopt the most current version of NESC 218 because we've all dealt with experts, they're always changing something. Right? And when they do, that means you have a new version. When you have a new version, does the legislature actually have to get together and, you know, debate whether this is appropriate or not? Well, some states say, nah, just whatever NESC says, we just adopt the latest version. Other states like North Dakota, we're going to have some sort of debate before any of this gets implemented. Other states, and I've learned this from a contact I made at a utility, said, you know, we've actually got a problem. We cover several states, and some states have the most recent version of NESC 218. Others require us to use outdated versions, which are dangerous and wrong. And that puts us in a really bad position because we have to break the law in order to do what's right. And that's a very uncomfortable position for the general counsel of the utility company. The Urban Wildlife Interface Code requires the removal of vegetation within 10 feet of any power pole with equipment that's attached to it. Now, here's some interesting stuff that students found. New Mexico has adopted the code, but leaves it up to individual counties to implement or not. Some counties implement the code, others don't. And that means that a utility supplying power to 2 counties, one that does, one that doesn't, is actually required to do two different things in those two different counties. South Dakota adopted the code, but left it up to individual municipalities whether to enforce or not. And to date, there is only one municipality in the entire state that actually implemented it. A municipality that's merely 2 square miles and has a population of 3,000 people. I don't know anyone at the utility company that supplies them with power. I gotta wonder, do they really do things differently in that one tiny little municipality? And if they don't, what kind of trouble can they get in? So, there's really wide variation. It creates enormous legal problems that should and could be solved by competent legal counsel. The utility companies could find them. So we're trying to produce them. Okay, here's some miscellaneous findings. I'm not going to go through each and every one of these, but Delaware was interesting. Delaware requires utilities to report all outages by cause. And so as a result, in Delaware, unlike most other states, you can actually find out what was the cause of the outage. And you can go back and you can create a database and you can learn from what kind of problems are present in Delaware on either a regular basis or an irregular basis. Let's see. Massachusetts is interesting in that what they do is they say that if they believe in their discretion that a utility company is unable to timely restore power, they will take another utility that they think can do it, and they'll put them in charge, and they give over the entire utility to some other company to run until the emergency's passed. Holy cow, get your company taken away from you. This is heady stuff. So let's get into phase 3, which is the law review papers. Each participating student chose a really, truly ambitious project, and I'm really thrilled to tell you all about them. And let's start with Cheri's paper. Cheri's paper makes the case that Texas's proposition that it is open for business, right, we've all heard that, is being undermined by relatively poor electric reliability performance statewide. I'm not pointing fingers at any particular utility. And neither is she. And what she's positing is that electric reliability in Texas would benefit from Florida-style storm hardening and Montana-style winterization and California-style utility vegetation management. But can all that be done without California-style regulations and rates? Because California pays the highest utility bills in the country, but by a lot. And the other problem here is that California and Texas are culturally very different. Yeah, that's kind of funny in some ways, but think of it this way. El Paso is actually closer to California than it is to Austin. There you go. So, that aside, in California, culturally, they are accepting of the idea that you can layer on more and more regulations. And if that's done to protect the general population from some sort of danger, well, that's okay. And if it infringes on my personal property rights, well, that's okay too. And if it means that some utility can come trampling all over my property to trim this tree or take out that bush, well, that's what that means. And that's okay in California. Try that in Texas. Yeah, that's not going to go over very well at all. And that's because Texas is a culturally different place. And so how can you get this done? Because California has, despite all the wildfire news, they have done a very good job of figuring out how to tame the problem of trees falling into power lines. Their execution leaves a little work to be desired, but their process is basically right. But you can't do that in Texas, you just can't. And one of the main threats is not actually the trees that are within the utility right of way. Those trees, by and large, are being handled. The real threat are the trees that are outside of the right of way, on your personal property, that are threatening the line. Now, the problem is the utility company does not have a legal right to go onto your property outside of the right of way to attack that tree, despite the fact that if that tree comes down on that power line, it'll at least cause an outage. And if, I don't know, your next door neighbor has a dialysis machine or a ventilator, they need that for survival, and without the power, they could be dead. The utility doesn't have the right to come onto your property to do anything about it. So Cheri is positing, well, I'm not so distant from my first year of high school in Tulane, and nuisance law,
Oh, yes.
right? Go ahead.
That when the utility makes it known to a homeowner, hey, you have this hazard tree is what they're called. And if the homeowner refuses to, instead of the utility taking that on, they just refer it to the AG, and it becomes the same sexes problem, which saves ratepayers money because now you're not spending money to go after that homeowner. And then the AG will
Has all kinds of powers, right? I mean, the Attorney General can condemn your property, making it illegal for anyone to live there, including you. That's motivation to get rid of that tree, right? I mean, if you really want to force the issue, that's how you could do it. If we could take questions at the end, that'd probably be better. But hold on to it. I'm sure this is going to generate questions. And I'm not saying you have to go the most aggressive step right out of the box. You shouldn't have to do that, right? Really, truly, and properly, you should try and approach it on a friendly basis. And remember also, for every tree you remove, you are removing carbon capture capability. And that is something that's important for the planet. Something that the student on this project, who's not actually in the audience today, was working on. Corinne Geeke's paper deals with the question of a holistic approach to vegetation management. Out in California, just by way of example, PG&E, which is their largest public utility, their largest independent investor-owned utility. Their largest investor-owned utility spent last year somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.2 billion removing trees, and spent a little under $5 million planting them. Well, who here thinks that that is going to create a cooler, wetter environment that will prevent future forest fires? Yeah, that's what I thought, right? Nobody thinks that. And yet, that's what they've done year after year after year. Is it any wonder that it's getting hotter and drier in California? And the answer is, no, it's not. What we need to do, Corinne says, is we need to start planting trees. And the best place to start is in poor neighborhoods. Why does she say that? Well, if anyone's looked at the American Forest's tree equity score, what you will see universally across the country is that wealthy neighborhoods, like say uptown New Orleans, have lots of big, beautiful trees. And poor neighborhoods, say Bayou St. John or Lower Ninth Ward, how many trees do you see there? Almost none, right? And the thing is, both neighborhoods are served by the very same utility, right? They're both paying the exact same rate per kilowatt hour for the service to their homes. And what does that mean? That means the citizens in the poor neighborhoods are effectively paying for the tree work to be done in wealthy people's neighborhoods. Poor people paying for wealthy people's tree care? Really? Does that sound equitable? No. So how do you restore this balance? Well, you don't take out the rich people's trees, you give the poor people trees. And what will that do? Well, think about it. More carbon capture, better air, lower temperatures. In a city like New Orleans, which is basically built in a swamp, you have better soil conditions. You're improving the soil. You're absorbing water out of the soil, so you have less problem with flooding from every minor rainfall. You have all kinds of cures. Plus, if you strategically plant that tree so that it will give shade to that homeowner's air conditioner unit, they will save as much as 50% of their electric bills during hot weather. Now that is something worth thinking about. And if what you're planting are trees that flower, you're helping pollinators. If you're planting trees that produce fruit or nuts, you're giving the homeowner a resource that not only can they feed themselves with that, and I'm not saying you survive on apples or walnuts or pecans, but you eat your fill and all the rest, there are people out there who will buy it, right? So, there's benefits here to the environment, to people. This is something that can be done to enrich neighborhoods. When you take two identical houses side by side, equal distant from all access to fire hydrants and utilities and all that kind of thing, same house next door to each other, one's got a tree, one doesn't, which one's worth more? The one with the tree. Every time. Every time. You are improving people's property values by doing this sort of thing. And utility companies can and should be planting trees. It will help them offset the carbon that they're generating in producing and delivering the electricity. And that's good for them because right now, by and large, most of those utilities are buying carbon credits. If they can start saying, well, we're offsetting the carbon by doing tree planting, that expense to that utility will drop. Their maintenance costs will drop by appropriate right tree, right place tree planting activities. And that has attracted the attention of Arbor Day Foundation, the world's largest tree planting organization. And they have started an initiative working with Tulane and working with my tree company out in California that is developing a municipal tree ordinance to be adopted by the Tree City USAs that are in their program and outside of the United States, Tree Cities of the World. It's the same program, just, if you're in, I don't know, Syria, you might not want to be called a Tree City USA. It may be bad for business. So at any rate, all those tree cities, there's 80-something thousand of them on the planet. And if they start adopting a municipal ordinance developed here, wow. And Corinne will graduate from this law school having written a law adopted by 80,000 municipalities all across the planet. That's a pretty impressive thing. Ryan Anderson, sitting right there. She actually would have said, "Oh, Larry, your talk was my favorite," well, at least I think, because her paper has to do with safety. And that's what I taught at the educational part of our program, was tree safety. I was responsible at our company for the safety program that we've got, and it is second to none in California, and from what I understand, essentially nationwide. And the problem is this industry is dangerous, almost criminally so. You are 70 times more likely to die in a UVM-related incident than you are in the average of any other or all other industries all across this country. And why is that? Well, safety code in this industry is kind of rudimentary. And that upset Ryan. And she spoke about that with Professor John Ball, who's a professor at South Dakota State University and the nation's leading expert on deaths and injuries in this industry. And he invited Ryan to join the ANSI task force, the American National Standards Institute. And they are in the process of redeveloping those safety regulations right now. And the next edition comes out in May of next year, right around the time she graduates. And it will have her name on it as one of the task force members because she's been contributing to the work of that task force. And her paper is saying, well, that's great, but that's not enough either. Because the real problem lies with OSHA, because OSHA has not established a teachable standard whereby somebody can say, well, I've got a license to be able to do this. I have taken the required safety training because every company is free to develop its own program, just like I did for ours. Now, mine is a good one, but by and large, any company anywhere can develop anything. And it can be a 5-minute talk. And maybe it's 2 or 3 days worth of safety training, and repeated programming and that kind of thing. And it really varies all across the industry. And that's a huge problem. Worse, if you're an OSHA safety inspector and you walk out your OSHA office door, you've got to go inspect somebody today. Well, do you go to the factory or do you go to the tree company? Well, if you go to the factory, you know exactly where it is. They don't pick up factories and move them around. You go to the tree company, well, that tree, you're not going to their office. They're not doing any tree work there. Their tree crews are here, there, everywhere, and they work somewhere for an hour and then they leave and they go somewhere else. And if they know the OSHA inspector's coming, well, they're supposed to be here, but they're over there. Or, oh, we're on break, whatever it is, right? They have a hard time pinning down the tree company where it's at. That's problem number one. Problem number two is without a really clear, solid standard for the tree companies to follow, well then, how how do you issue a fine? How do you issue a penalty? Well, did you do this? Well, yeah, we have this, and here, look, these are our sign-in sheets. Was that guy? Well, no, that's somebody he left a week ago. They have no way to track any of this down. You go to the factory. Well, this device is supposed to be within so many inches of that thing, and pull out your tape measure. It is or it isn't. And if it's not, issue a fine. Where does that fine money go? Well, a large part of it goes to your office to pay for your salary. So if you're an OSHA inspector, where do you go? The factory, every single time. Are you not doing your job? No, you're doing your job. But the tree companies get ignored, and they know it. And they know that, well, just try to be safe, but and that's a huge problem. Steve Moctezuma, sitting right there, has a great presentation as well for his program, and we're about halfway done with his paper. He is saying that there are problems in the dealing with small claims in this industry. There are lots and lots of people suffering from small claims injustices, and they have nowhere to go. They really don't. They can make an appeal to their Public Utility Commission, but Byzantine and esoteric, yes. And if you're a low-income person with English as a second language, if it's a language of yours at all, and you're just not going to have access to that. And so what then? Well, you can't hire a lawyer, a $500 loss. They're not going to take those cases. You have other related problems. You're just not going to get any sort of justice. So what do? You develop, as Stephen says, a mediation center. And develop it here. And let's try it. Let's see if we can get all the small claims to come here. Utility companies could be bound to an agreement for a year, see if it works, and see if small claims can be brought here, represented by students for the claimant, and the utilities can be represented by attorneys, can be represented by other students, however they want to handle it, that's fine. And have a mediator to decide these cases and do justice. That's not to say the claimant will always win. They won't. Lots of times they won't have good claims. They won't have claims they can back up. But they will at least have had a measure of justice, which they're being denied right now. There's 30 other projects that we're working on. They're huge and they're impactful. And these are things that have real meaning for every person here. And these are efforts and initiatives being driven by this utility vegetation management initiative. We're planning this summit to occur in the spring. We don't have a date yet, but we will keep you informed. 16 credits. Take that course, you'll know more than 99% of all the other lawyers out there. Those are cases that you can bring home to your firms if you're practicing attorneys, and you can be the expert in this, at least until the students coming up start replacing it. All right, Tulane's taken the lead in UVM law, policy, and practice, and we've enjoyed enormous success so far. We've developed the only compendium. Our first group of students has been trained to meet the challenges. From our first group of students, we have an enormous success in landing a job at the Public Utility Commission without an interview or without even passing the bar yet.
That's true. I've just taken the bar.
We've developed a strong relationship with all industry leading groups and are nurturing new relationships even now. So this is a program that needs some support. Please consider supporting it. It affects you. The returns will be for you. Thanks for your attention. We're happy to take questions. You were first, for sure.
I'm looking at this from the view of a New Orleans native who lives in the suburbs, who's got a 5-foot utility servitude behind his house. Everybody's got a tree that goes up into the wires. I told you before when we came in that I just had our water oak tree removed before Ida. $23,000 to remove that tree. So I'm trying, I love the projects that you've got going. All of them are, but how are you going to convince regulators and legislators to do this? I'm a lawyer, I don't know the science. I understand that wood conducts electricity. I don't know, you know, and I understand regulations, but I don't know how the cost, how it would be done, and then how that would be passed along to the ratepayers, and how you're gonna get that past the Louisiana Public Service Commission.
Well, and I've got an answer for you, and it's direct, I'm not evading. There are there are actually several different pieces of how to answer that. One is, one of the reasons that it costs $23,000 to do that one project is because the number of qualified tree companies that can actually do the work is very, very few and far between. And the number of workers that they have working for them who can really do that safely are even fewer. What we need are more people trained to do this work. And that is part of this program as well. I don't know if I flipped through it too fast, but part of what we're trying to accomplish is the training of more tree workers to do this work. And it is possible.
OSHA regulations.
Yes, right. And that would lower the cost, because once you have more supply, right, the demand will be more or less the same, but with more supply, the rates will go down. So that will make the project cheaper. The other thing is the work that needs to be done, the cost of that does not always need to come from either the ratepayer or the utility. In fact, the federal government has programs with money allocated to do this work that nobody ever taps into. Those pots of money sit there unused and then get rolled back into the general budget, and they get allocated again and remain unused year after year after year. So I believe firmly that if I told the Louisiana legislature that they could get their hands on federal money to pay for projects in Louisiana, that they wouldn't have to fund themselves, I think I might be able to bend an ear. Third, I'd say one of the other things that we can do is place well-educated students who've been through the program in public utility commissions in Louisiana, just like Cheri has landed a job in Texas. Now, I can't promise, like I said before, that they will land a job without an interview, but they are so hungry for anyone who knows anything about this that when they realize they could get a student from here to help them through what they need to know, by and large, they're making decisions in the dark. If somebody can shine a light and say, well, here's the answer, this is what you need to do, and this is well-reasoned, and here's the science, here's the law, here's what it needs to be. And I was trained here, the only place in the world where you can learn this. I think that's how you get it through.
Thank you.
Sure, my pleasure. Anyone else? Trev, you had your hand up. No? Oh, you're scratching your.
I was just
okay.
giving you the
2 minutes.
2 minute signal.
All right. Anyone else?
And the peace sign to Cheri.
Okay. Well, hey, everybody, thank you for your attention. Anyone who needs or wants a business card from me, I've got them. Feel free to reach out to me. Any questions you may have that you were too shy to ask in the open, that's fine. I'm here, I'm available. I hope that you'll support this program, think about it from time to time, and come back and learn more. We're here to teach you this. Come and take the CLE credits here. Learn something that will be useful for your practices, that will be useful for future job opportunities if you're still a student. Thank you very much.